Here is the thing about a rock goodbye. Nobody means it the first time. Sometimes not the second time either. Most of the bands on this list said farewell from a stage and were back within a few years. But one of them said goodbye so quietly and with so little fanfare that most of us did not understand what we were watching until years later. That one is the reason this list exists. The rest of them are the reason it hurts. Let's go. Number 10. The Who. The Farewell Tour, 1982. I want to start here because The Who did not just do a fake farewell tour. They invented it. Before The Who, nobody had really proven that you could say goodbye to an audience, mean it, fail to go through with it, and still sell tickets to the next show. The Who proved it, and they did it in 1982. "40 North American dates, billed as the farewell tour. Pete Townshend had been trying to hold the band together since Keith Moon died in 1978. They had replaced him with Kenny Jones and made 2 more albums. Honest records, good even, but different in a way you could feel. And Pete had simply had enough. He said so publicly. He wanted his life back. So the band filmed the final show at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto for an HBO special they called Who's Last, and called it The End. 8 months later, they were on the Live Aid stage in Wembley. And I know you know exactly the feeling I am describing right now. That specific combination of betrayal and relief when something you thought was over is suddenly not over, and you do not know which emotion to land on. Most people went with relief. You probably would have too. The Who came back in 1989, and then again, and then again. And when Pete Townshend was eventually asked directly why anyone should believe yet another Who goodbye, he told a reporter that The Who had essentially been in the business of pulling a fast one on their audiences their entire career, and he did not see why that should change now. I respect the honesty, I do not fully forgive the pattern. In 2025, they announced another North American farewell tour. The song is over. Tickets sold immediately. That is the deal you make when you love a band that good. You accept the terms, you buy the ticket anyway. Number 9, The Scorpions. Get Your Sting and Blackout World Tour, 2010. In January 2010, the Scorpions announced retirement. Not a pause, not a rest, retirement. Their album that year was called Sting in the Tail. The farewell tour was called the Get Your Sting and Blackout World Tour. The title of the album was in the name of the tour. They were not leaving a lot of room for interpretation. And in a lot of ways it made sense. The Scorpions had been at this since the 1960s. Klaus Meine had survived 2 throat surgeries in the early 80s that had nearly ended his career before it reached its peak. They had made Blackout and Love Drive and a song called Wind of Change that was part of the actual soundtrack of history being made when the Berlin Wall came down. A graceful exit felt right. Then the farewell tour started. And something happened at the shows that no one had accounted for. The kids in the front row. Not the original fans, not the people who had been there in the 80s. Young people, teenagers who had found the Scorpions through the internet, arriving at what was supposed to be a goodbye show with the same electricity as an opening night. Rudolf Schenker talked about this afterward, about looking down at the front of the stage during their own farewell. And seeing that generation of new faces and thinking, what exactly are we walking away from? And if you have ever started to walk away from something important and then looked back over your shoulder and seen a reason to stay, you know exactly the version of this that the Scorpions experienced. Except theirs happened in front of thousands of people every night, which is somehow the most honest version of that feeling. 3 years after announcing retirement, they were still touring. In 2015, they released Return to Forever. When Klaus Meine was asked about 2010, he said simply, they had had a moment of doubt. They had been wrong. There was still a lot of sting in the tail. Let's look at the numbers. Only 9% of you are actually subscribed. Honestly, that's tough to see. Our team spends days hunting down archives and verifying every single fact just to tell these stories right. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly part of the community, so please hit subscribe. It costs nothing and helps us immensely. Now, for those already subscribed, very few of you have made the jump to our membership, and that's a hard pill to swallow because you're the ones who know our value best. If this channel has moved you or inspired you, consider joining. It's the price of one coffee, but it's the literal fuel for this channel. Let's keep this alive together. Back to the story. Number 8, Judas Priest, Epitaph World Tour, 2011 to 2012. On December 7, 2010, Judas Priest announced that their next world tour would be their last. They called it the Epitaph World Tour. Epitaph, the word you chisel into stone. After 40 years of heavy metal that had genuinely changed what the genre could be, after Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith and Painkiller and all of it, they were going to give one final tour, and that was going to be the end. Rob Halford gave interviews about it that did not read as performance. He talked about the passage of time and about closing something properly, and I believe he meant every word of it in January 2011 when he said he thought it was the right time. And then, before the tour even began, founding guitarist K.K. Downing walked out. He left the band. The Epitaph farewell to the classic Priest lineup launched without one of the guitarists who had defined what that lineup sounded like for nearly 4 decades. They brought in Richie Faulkner, who was 31 years old, and here is what I need to tell you about Richie Faulkner. He was extraordinary. He brought something into those shows that nobody had anticipated. An energy that pointed toward the future even while the tour was supposed to be closing the past. The Epitaph World Tour ran 120 shows from June 2011 to May 2012. The final night was at the Hammersmith Apollo in London. By all accounts, some of the finest Priest sets of their career. 2 years later, the Redeemer of Souls tour began. I think about this one, about how a farewell, done right, can sometimes work more like a beginning than an ending. And whether Priest knew that was possible when they walked into the Epitaph, or whether they found it somewhere in those 120 shows. Number 7, Ozzy Osbourne, No More Tours, Clyde. Ozzy Osbourne is the only person on this list who sequelized his own farewell tour, who looked at his original goodbye, dusted it off, and released a version 2 with a number at the end. And I say that not as a complaint. I say it as someone who finds that to be one of the most perfectly Ozzy things that has ever been done by a human being on this planet. In 1992, Osbourne launched the No More Tours tour, 64 shows across North America, closing November 15th. The reason was genuine. Osbourne had received a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, a diagnosis that later turned out to be incorrect, and he wanted to stop. He wanted to spend time with his family. He had been on the road for the better part of 25 years, and the math had finally stopped making sense. 3 years later, he was back, and the tour he came back with? The Retirement Sucks Tour, which is, and I want to say this clearly, one of the greatest tour names in the history of rock and roll. The man understood exactly what he had done and made the funniest possible decision about what to call the thing he had just done. That is a level of self-awareness that most people never get to. Then, in 2018, he announced No More Tours 2, a direct, unambiguous sequel to his original farewell. And you already know this feeling in some version of your own life. The promise you made to yourself that ran directly into who you actually are. The commitment that felt completely sincere at the time and then turned out to be a temporary version of the truth. Ozzy Osbourne loves being Ozzy Osbourne too much to stop being Ozzy Osbourne. That is the entire story. And I mean it as the highest compliment I know how to give. No More Tours 2 was ultimately cut short by a series of serious health issues that accumulated over the following years. The The man who invented the sequel to his own farewell did not get to control the ending. And that particular idea, the farewell that gets taken away from you before you can finish it, is one we are going to come back to. Number 6. Lynyrd Skynyrd, The Last of the Street Survivors Farewell Tour, 2018. The name alone tells you what kind of weight these men were carrying. Street Survivors was the album Lynyrd Skynyrd released in October 1977. 3 days after it came out, the chartered plane carrying the band crashed in a Mississippi forest, killing Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, his sister Cassie Gaines, and 3 others. The image on the original album cover, the band surrounded by flames, was pulled from shelves immediately. Street Survivors stopped being an album title and became a description of the human beings who had lived through what happened on that plane. Gary Rossington was one of those people. He co-founded the band in Jacksonville in 1964 and was the only living member of the original lineup when the last of the Street Survivors farewell tour was announced in January 2018. For nearly 50 years, across every version of Lynyrd Skynyrd, Gary Rossington was the one constant. The one thread connecting the band that Ronnie Van Zant built to the band still out there playing. The tour launched May 4, 2018 in West Palm Beach. It was supposed to run through 2019 and then close the chapter. It did not close the chapter. Rossington had heart procedures during the tour. The pandemic stopped everything in 2020. The name changed at some point. They called it the Big Wheels Keep on Turnin' Tour, which was either a joke or a signal or both. And then the dates kept coming, because apparently they could not stop. Because some bands are constitutionally incapable of stopping, and there is something almost admirable about that, even when you can also see the weight of it. On March 5, 2023, Gary Rossington died at 71 years old. I want to give that the space it deserves. The last surviving founding member of Lynyrd Skynyrd died during his own farewell tour. Not at the end of it, during it. The goodbye that was announced in 2018 became, over 5 years, something it was never supposed to be. A vigil, a tribute, a slow reckoning with what it means to still be here when so many of the people you started with are not. I do not have a better word for what that is. Number 5, Kiss, The Farewell Tour, 2000 to 2001. You know this one. We all know this one. And I want to sit with it for a minute because the story underneath it makes the whole thing look different. The Kiss Farewell Tour started March 11, 2000, in Phoenix, Arizona, and ran for 142 shows over just over a year. 142 nights where every city was told it was watching the final Kiss concert in its history. Full makeup, full staging, every pyrotechnic thing you would expect Kiss to do, multiplied by the fact that this was supposedly the last time. The production was everything a Kiss production is, which is to say enormous in ways that are difficult to explain to someone who has not stood inside one. Paul Stanley later talked about what was actually happening behind the scenes. The reunion 4 years earlier had brought original members Ace Frehley and Peter Criss back, and for a while that had worked. By the time the farewell tour arrived, it had stopped working. Frehley missed a flight during the tour and had to helicopter in to make a show. Criss had effectively left the band by October 2000, though no public announcement was made. The farewell was, in significant part, a mechanism for ending an arrangement that had become impossible to sustain. Not a goodbye to the audience so much as a goodbye to a version of the band that could no longer hold itself together. After the farewell tour, Kiss continued. Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer stepped into the roles of Spaceman and Catman in the original makeup, and the touring went on. Then in 2019, the End of the Road farewell tour launched and ran through 2023. Some bands cannot say goodbye because they do not believe in goodbye as a concept. Kiss is one of those bands. And I mean that as an observation, not a verdict. Number 4, the Eagles. The goodbye that was never said. After January 2016,
I know that you got your reasons.
the Eagles never had a farewell tour. That is the whole strange thing about this entry. They never stood on a stage with a tour name and a send-off and said, "This is the last time." What happened instead was quieter and more disorienting. On January 18, 2016, Glenn Frey died. He was 67 years old, and his death came from multiple serious health complications. And in the absence of any ceremony, in the absence of a formal goodbye of any kind, the ending just arrived. Glenn is gone. Everyone assumed the Eagles were done. Hotel California, Take It Easy, Desperado, the whole California sunset of what that band had built. Over, quietly, in January. Don Henley announced in 2017 that the Eagles would continue. Vince Gill joined, and if you have not heard Vince Gill sing, I need you to understand that we are talking about one of the finest vocalists in American music, period, and I will not be taking questions on that. Deacon Frey, Glenn's son, joined as well. The Hotel California tour followed, more tours after that. And here is where I want to say something to you directly, because I think you have your own answer to what I am about to ask, and I genuinely want to hear it someday in the comments. Is a band still the band when the person who made it essential is no longer there? Not the business, not the catalog, the band. I do not have the answer. I have been sitting with it for a long time. What I know is that watching Deacon Frey sing his father's parts is one of the most complicated things in live music. Not wrong, not bad, just complicated in the specific way that grief is complicated when it finds a place to live alongside something that is still alive and moving. The Eagles never said goodbye because there was no moment when goodbye felt like the right word. There was only loss. And then the decision, made quietly, without a press conference, to keep going anyway. Number 3, Mötley Crüe. The final tour, 2014 to 2015. January 28, 2014. Features Madhouse Theater in Hollywood. The band arrived in a hearse. They sat behind tombstones with their own names carved into them. And on the table in front of them was a real legal document, the cessation of touring agreement, stating in binding contractual language that Mötley Crüe would never tour again after December 31, 2015. All 4 of them signed it. A notary public witnessed it on the spot. Nikki Sixx told the press that there was no amount of money in the world that would bring them back. The only loophole, he acknowledged, was unanimous consent from all 4 members to void it, which, he said, would never happen. The final tour ran through 2014 and 2015, closing on New Year's Eve at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. Tommy Lee later said that standing on that stage, he genuinely believed it was over, that this was the real thing, that after 30-plus years they were actually done. In November 2019, the band posted a video of themselves detonating the contract with a block of TNT. It was narrated by Machine Gun Kelly. The Netflix movie The Dirt had come out that spring, introducing Mötley Crüe to an entire generation that had not been alive for Shout at the Devil, and suddenly the calculus on the tombstones at the press conference had changed completely. The stadium tour launched in June 2022 after COVID delays. It grossed $173 million. It became the biggest tour in the band's history. And I am going to tell you something honest. I cannot find it in me to be genuinely angry about this one. A contract between 4 band members is exactly as binding as those 4 band members want it to be. The loophole was unanimous consent. They gave unanimous consent. That is Mötley Crüe being Mötley Crüe all the way through, theatrical about the beginning, theatrical about the end, and theatrical about the fact that the end was not the end. You just smiled. I know you did. Because that is the only correct reaction to this story. Number 2, Aerosmith, Peace Out Farewell Tour, 2023. In May 2023, Aerosmith announced the Peace Out Farewell Tour. And unlike almost every other entry on this list, this one felt genuine from the beginning. Steven Tyler was 75 years old. Joe Perry had survived a serious medical emergency in 2016. The band had been together in some form for more than 50 years, through addiction and breakups and the kind of internal chaos that should have ended them multiple times and did not. A proper goodbye felt not just earned but necessary, like the thing they were owed. The tour launched September 2, 2023, at the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia. The first shows were strong. Then, on September 9th, at a show in New York, Tyler suffered vocal cord damage severe enough that the following dates had to be postponed. The band and their doctors worked through it, announced a reschedule for 2024, and then it became clear that the vocal cord damage had also included a fractured larynx, that the injury was more serious than anyone had initially understood. On August 2nd, 2024, Aerosmith officially announced their retirement from touring. The Peace Out Tour, which had opened September 2nd and managed exactly a handful of shows, was over. Not completed. Not wrapped up with a final night and a proper send-off. Just over. The band that had been doing this for 50 years did not get to choose how their story ended on stage. And here is what I keep coming back to. Every other entry on this list is about a band that promised goodbye and did not mean it. Aerosmith meant it. The farewell tour was genuine, and the universe took it from them before they could finish it. If you have ever tried to close something important on your own terms, a conversation, a chapter, anything, and been interrupted before you could get to the ending you had planned, you know exactly what I am talking about. You know the specific feeling of not getting to finish the sentence. Aerosmith did not get to finish the sentence. And that is the most honest kind of painful on this entire... Number 1. Rush. R40 Live Tour. 2015 Rush never called the R40 Live Tour a farewell tour. That is what makes this different from every other one on this list. The R40 marked the 40th anniversary of Neil Peart joining Rush. 35 shows, all North America, May 8th through August 1st, 2015. Peart was 62 years old, battling chronic tendonitis and shoulder problems that had made the physical cost of a 3-hour Rush concert something his body could no longer keep paying. He wanted to be home with his young daughter. He wanted his life. Nobody used the word farewell, but the set list told you what this was. It moved backward through Rush's entire catalog, from the newest records all the way to the oldest, as if the three of them were retracing everything they had ever built together, walking back through it one final time. And then... August 1st, 2015. The Forum in Los Angeles. Final night of the tour. Neil Peart stepped out from behind the drum kit, walked to the front of the stage, stood with Geddy and Alex, took a bow. He had never done that. In 40 years, not once. I want you to sit with just that detail for a moment. "40 years of Rush concerts. Peart always behind the kit, visible only at the back, never once crossing to the front. And on this night he crossed. He came to where the audience could see him. He let himself be seen. He said later he talked himself into it, that it felt like the right thing to do. He knew what this was. Neil Peart died January 7, 2020, from glioblastoma, brain cancer he had been fighting privately for over 3 years. Almost no one had known. When the news broke, everything about the R40 fell into a different shape. The set list walking backward. The 35 shows limited to North America. The bow that he had never taken before and never would again.